The sudden acquisition of immense wealth often attracts predatory individuals who view human lives as mere obstacles to their own financial gain. Abraham Shakespeare was an illiterate laborer whose generous spirit became his greatest vulnerability after winning a $30 million lottery jackpot. His mysterious disappearance drew national attention as investigators struggled to separate the man's desire for peace from a much darker, calculated reality. Unresolved questions persisted for months regarding how a man who could not read was supposedly sending articulate text messages to his family. In the sweltering humidity of Plant City, a cousin stood, staring at a patch of gray concrete that felt unnaturally out of place. The surface was cold and jagged, yet it seemed to pulse with a hidden weight that the surrounding Florida landscape could not justify. For months, the world believed Abraham had simply vanished into the Caribbean sun to escape the relentless leeches begging for his newfound fortune. But as the witness touched the rough industrial texture, a primal instinct whispered that his kin was not resting on a distant beach. The silence of the property was heavy, echoing the immortality a self-proclaimed benefactor claimed to provide through her twisted version of financial protection. Investigators initially dismissed the family's frantic concerns, suggesting that the millionaire had every right to remain hidden from the public's prying eyes. This official indifference allowed a master manipulator to continue her elaborate performance while the victim lay discarded beneath 5 feet of heavy stone. The art of this crime was not in the violence itself, but in the meticulous preservation of a lie through digital ghosts. Doris Moore allegedly viewed her control over Abraham's assets as a sacred duty, transforming his hard-earned luck into her personal, high-end gallery. She moved through his million-dollar home with the grace of a rightful heir, seemingly untouched by the moral decay rotting in the backyard. Every luxury car she purchased with his blood money served as a trophy, a physical manifestation of her perceived intellectual and social superiority. The signature mark of the man, his calloused hands that once high-cam, were now forever stilled in an impossible, dark, and airless setting. When the first cracks in the concrete were finally made, the smell of limestone and betrayal began to leak into the stagnant air. A rolled-up oriental rug emerged from the earth, serving as a crude sarcophagus for a man who only ever wanted to be kind. The contrast between the vibrant, generous life he lived and the gray, artificial tomb he occupied was a tragedy of immense proportions. As the authorities began to dig by hand, the true depth of the deception started to reveal itself to the horrified onlookers nearby. It was a moment of chilling realization, where the object found in the dirt was recognized as the missing soul of their community. The perpetrator's lack of remorse was already evident in the way she had prepared the site with bags of chemicals to mask nature. She had allegedly convinced herself that she was saving him from the world, when in reality, she was merely consuming his very existence. The legal system had watched as his fortune was drained, yet it took the persistent obsession of strangers to challenge the silence. Before the first body bag was even zipped, the digital trail began to hum with the activity of those who refused to forget. They looked past the polished Hummers and the carefully crafted videos to find the inconsistencies that the local police had initially overlooked. The story of Abraham Shakespeare began with a lucky ticket, but was destined to end with a calculated strike from a predatory shadow. Each line of his story was being rewritten by those who sought justice. Even as the killer prepared her next move of defiance, the narrative of his life was no longer his own, having been stolen by a woman who valued a Corvette over a heartbeat. In the quiet of the morgue, the medical examiner prepared to confirm what the internet had already whispered through months of intense investigation. The physical details of the victim remained, a haunting reminder of the man who once gave his last $5 to a friend. His clothing matched the last images ever taken of him, a final costume for a play directed by a woman named Dee Moore. As the sun set over the crime scene, the focus shifted from a missing person to a cold-blooded hunt for a calculated killer. The community watched in silence as the weight of the evidence began to press down on the woman who thought she was untouchable. The initial indifference of the law was replaced by a frantic energy to recover the truth that had been buried in the dark. Beneath the surface of the quiet town, a web of financial deceit and murderous intent was waiting to be pulled into the light. The journey toward justice would be long, but the first stone had been turned, revealing the rot that lay hidden in plain sight. Every cent of the $30 million now seemed to carry a curse that no amount of legal maneuvering could ever truly wash away. The narrative now turned back to the beginning, to the convenience store, where a simple worker's life was forever changed by a ticket. It was a moment of pure hope that would eventually lead to the cold, hard slab of concrete where the investigation truly began. The transition from millionaire to missing person occurred in the shadows of greed, fueled by the very people he had tried to help. As the global audience waited for answers, the digital sleuths prepared to unveil the masks worn by those who claimed to be friends. The story of Abraham was not just about money, but about the terrifying vulnerability of a kind heart in a world of wolves. Each detail, discovered in the artificial setting of the Plant City property, would soon become a pillar of the prosecution's upcoming legal case. The stage was set for a confrontation between a delusional artist of crime and the persistent, unyielding reality of her own terrible actions. Behind the yellow tape, the truth remained stubborn, waiting for the voices of the living to speak for the man who was silenced. The illusion of Abraham's continued existence was meticulously maintained through a series of digital charades designed to deceive his grieving family. Doris Moore allegedly utilized the victim's own cellular device to broadcast messages that mirrored a man desperate to escape his life. One chilling text message claimed he was a grown man who would only return to his home whenever he felt ready. These artificial communications served as a psychological barrier, preventing the authorities from launching a full-scale homicide investigation during the early months. To those who truly knew the laborer, these articulate sentences were impossible artifacts, because the man could neither read nor write. The uncanny valley of his digital ghost began to unsettle his closest friends, who recognized the syntax was not his own. While his mother prayed for his safety in Jamaica, a predator was busy absorbing every dollar of his hard-earned lottery winnings. The perpetrator framed her systemic theft as a sophisticated form of asset protection, creating a labyrinth of fraudulent corporate entities. Abraham Shakespeare LLC was established not to serve the victim, but to provide a legal shroud for the suspect's lavish splurges. She allegedly transformed herself into a self-appointed guardian, while simultaneously purchasing high-end vehicles using the blood money of her friend. The local sheriff's department initially struggled to find a concrete reason to intervene, citing the victim's right to personal privacy. This systemic silence provided the perfect environment for the killer to further entrench her control over the missing man's vast estate. She even filmed a staged video of a tired Abraham, using his exhaustion as a prop to justify his eventual permanent disappearance. In the recording, his eyes spoke of a deep, haunting sincerity that contrasted sharply with the predatory nature of his interviewer. He admitted to being tired of the constant badgering for money, unaware that the woman behind the camera was the ultimate leech. As the official investigation grew cold, a group of dedicated strangers on the internet began to dissect the suspect's public life. These amateur sleuths identified the signature mark of a con artist through her history of faking violent crimes for insurance payouts. They discovered that Doris had once staged her own abduction, leaving herself tied up in a ditch to collect fraudulent money. This revelation painted a portrait of a woman who viewed human tragedy as a creative medium for her own financial advancement. When the suspect realized she was being scrutinized online, she broke her silence and entered the digital forum to defend herself. Using the handle door, she lashed out at the investigators, accusing them of slandering a hard-working businesswoman without any legal proof. Her lack of remorse was palpable as she lectured the forum members about the state of the economy and their personal lives. This direct confrontation only served to embolden the sleuths, who began to uncover the duplicate names on her many property titles. They traced her digital footprints back to her own home, proving that the person defending the suspect was the suspect herself. The net was closing in as the physical reality of her crimes began to overshadow the digital facade she had built. Even as she claimed to be helping Abraham hide, she was allegedly paying bribes to create false sightings of him alive. She offered thousands of dollars to anyone who would lie to the police, desperate to keep the art of her deception intact. The eerie warmth of her manufactured kindness was finally cooling as the truth about the concrete slab began to surface online. A partner in her medical company had purchased the very property where the missing man would eventually be found hidden. The address of her many fraudulent businesses converged on a single point in Plant City, creating a map to the body. Each new discovery by the internet sleuths provided the legal leverage that the detectives needed to obtain their necessary search warrants. The investigators were impressed by how ordinary people with no official resources were uncovering critical files and suspicious financial records. While the law moved slowly, the collective intelligence of the digital community was moving with the speed of a predatory hunt. They highlighted the systemic failure that allowed a convicted fraudster to gain total control over a vulnerable man's entire fortune. Abraham's life had been reduced to a series of line items in a ledger, managed by a woman who felt no guilt. The final days of his immortality as a digital ghost were numbered as the police prepared to breach his silent tomb. The artificial stillness of the backyard was about to be shattered by the sound of shovels hitting the cursed Florida earth. Every text message and fake phone call had led back to this one specific location beneath the cold, gray cement. The twisted vision of Doris Moore was finally falling apart as the weight of the evidence became impossible to ignore. The victim's family waited in agony, caught between the hope of a Caribbean escape and the horror of the backyard. In the shadows of the million-dollar home, the truth was waiting to be exhumed from the darkness of the suspect's greed, the signature mark of the killer. Her arrogance would eventually become the very thing that led the law to her front door. No amount of limestone could mask the stench of a betrayal so deep that it shook the foundations of the community. As the first layers of concrete were removed, the world prepared to witness the tragic conclusion of Abraham Shakespeare's lucky life. The silence was about to end, and the man who could not speak for himself would finally have his day. The predatory shadow that had haunted his life was finally being pulled into the harsh, unforgiving light of the legal system. The investigation reached a critical juncture when investigators discovered that Doris Moore had allegedly bribed a law enforcement officer for information. This systemic betrayal of public trust allowed the perpetrator to monitor the authorities' progress while she managed her twisted artistic vision. She reportedly offered a small check and a plane ticket to the officer in exchange for data on suspicious vehicles. Meanwhile, the digital sleuths identified a specific property in Plant City that served as the nexus for her many fraudulent corporations. The signature mark of her deception was found in the shared address of Abraham Shakespeare LLC and her other medical entities. An uncanny stillness permeated the residence at 5802 State Road 60 East, where a massive concrete slab had been recently poured. Witnesses recalled that the industrial concrete was placed during the exact window of time when the millionaire had mysteriously vanished. The perpetrator allegedly viewed this heavy gray tomb as a permanent solution to the headaches her victim had supposedly caused. Investigators arrived at the site with heavy machinery, ready to peel back the layers of a crime disguised as home improvement. The atmosphere was somber as officers began the delicate process of digging by hand to preserve any potential biological evidence. Beneath 5 feet of solid earth and stone, the searchers encountered the tactile texture of a buried, rolled-up oriental rug. This artificial shroud contained the physical remains of a man who had once been the symbol of a lottery-winning miracle. The uncanny valley effect was chillingly realized when the victim was found wearing the same clothes from the suspect's video. Forensic experts also discovered bags of limestone, intended to chemically mask the natural process of decomposition and the scent of death. While the body lay in the cold ground, Doris Moore had allegedly been continuing her performance of being a helpful friend. She reportedly used the victim's phone to text his mother, offering $5,000 to a relative to deliver cards. Her lack of remorse was a delusional shield, as she insisted that she was merely protecting Abraham from his greedy family. The systemic silence was finally broken when the medical examiner officially confirmed the identity of the remains through fingerprint analysis. Digital sleuths watched from their screens as the tragedy they had predicted manifested in the red clay of a Florida backyard. The perpetrator's vision of immortality was nothing more than a shallow grave and a series of forged financial documents. As the news broke, the woman who claimed to be a benefactor secluded herself inside the victim's million-dollar mansion. She faced the media with a performance of innocence, declaring that she could never pull a gun on another human. Yet, the authorities found bloodstains matching the victim's DNA on the very carpet of her home office workspace. The signature mark of the killer was her arrogance, believing she could outsmart both the law and the collective internet. Her own lawyer eventually abandoned her, citing ethical obligations after the gruesome discovery was made public by the sheriff. The community mourned for the man who grew up illiterate, but possessed a heart that was too large for his world. He was a simple laborer who became a target for a predator who saw his generosity as a fatal weakness. The investigation now turned toward the mechanical details of the murder and the specific weapon used to end his life. Every financial transaction led back to a woman who had systematically dismantled a human being for her own personal gain. The concrete was no longer just a building material, but a heavy testament to the cruelty of extreme human greed. As the sun set over the excavated site, the true cost of the $30 million jackpot was finally revealed. The silence of Alien Moore had been replaced by the digital roar of justice demanding an answer for Abraham Shakespeare. The perpetrator was taken into custody, her chains rattling as she continued to proclaim a truth that no one believed. The story of the man beneath the slab was just beginning to be told in the halls of the courthouse. Behind the cold steel of the prison bars, the artist of this crime would soon face the reality of her ritual. The transition from life to an artificial display was a tragedy that the world would not soon be allowed to forget. The perpetrator allegedly enlisted the victim's close friend, Greg Smith, to perform as a vocal double in several deceptive phone calls. This calculated manipulation of a trusted bond was a signature mark of the suspect's twisted vision for total financial and social control. Smith initially cooperated with the charade, but his conscience eventually led him to become a secret informant for the Lakeland Police Department. He wore a hidden wire during subsequent meetings, capturing the chilling lack of remorse in the suspect's own recorded, predatory voice. The perpetrator reportedly asked Smith to locate a desperate individual who would be willing to take the fall for the murder. She offered $50,000 for a false confession, viewing the legal system as just another transaction in her artistic ritual. Smith introduced her to an undercover officer who successfully lured the suspect into revealing the exact location of the buried remains. In an act of staggering arrogance, she handed the officer the very firearm used to end Abraham Shakespeare's generous, complicated life. This physical evidence shattered the systemic silence that had allowed the perpetrator to inhabit the victim's million-dollar mansion for months. While she claimed the art of her protection was for his benefit, the forensic reality of the basement carpet told a different story. The uncanny valley of her defense began to collapse as investigators realized she had meticulously planned the burial weeks in advance. She had allegedly hired a laborer to dig a hole for construction debris on the very day the millionaire vanished forever. This hole became a crude display of her power, hidden beneath a concrete slab that she believed would grant her permanent immortality. The perpetrator's lack of empathy was evident when she blamed a mysterious drug dealer for the violence she had allegedly orchestrated. She insisted that she was a victim of circumstance, even as her fraudulent medical companies were found to be draining his accounts. The digital sleuths continued to bridge the narrative gaps, uncovering the shady financial history of the lawyers who once represented him. They discovered that his own legal counsel had systemic ties to the suspect, creating a web of betrayal that felt truly inescapable. Abraham's signature mark, his deep sincerity, was exploited by every professional he turned to for guidance after his life-changing lottery win. The artificial warmth of his benefactor was finally exposed as a cold, calculated strike against a man who could not read. Each text message sent from his phone was a linguistic forgery, a digital mask worn by a woman with a killer's heart. As the trial approached, the haunting nature of his final moments in that staged video began to weigh heavily on the public. The perpetrator continued to weep for herself in court, performing a role of a persecuted woman for the benefit of the cameras. However, the jury saw through the facade, recognizing the predatory patterns of a woman who viewed people as disposable financial assets. They deliberated for only 3 hours before returning a verdict that would finally silence the lies of Doris D. Moore. The judge described her as the most manipulative person he had ever seen, a fitting title for the architect of such tragedy. She was sentenced to spend the rest of her life in an environment far removed from the luxury her crimes had purchased. Even behind bars, she continued her twisted performance, advocating for lottery privacy laws to protect others from becoming similar targets. The systemic failures that allowed her to thrive served as a somber lesson for a community that failed to protect its own. Abraham's $30 million had bought him nothing but a gray tomb and a legacy of betrayal at the hands of sharks. The story now moved toward the final reflections of those who actually knew the man behind the comically large lottery check. They remembered a simple man who would give his last few dollars to anyone, regardless of the mistakes he had made. His eyes had spoken of a sincerity that no amount of industrial concrete could ever truly bury or hide from the world. The transition from human life to a crime scene was complete, leaving only the haunting echo of a strong yet gentle handshake. The investigation ended, but the tragedy of the laborer who won too much would remain an indelible mark on Florida's dark history. The perpetrator allegedly maintained a delusional belief that her control over the victim's fortune was a form of sacred financial preservation. Doris Moore reportedly justified her systemic theft by claiming she was the only individual capable of managing Abraham's massive lottery winnings. Her lack of remorse was a signature mark during the trial, as she continued to portray herself as a misunderstood benefactor. The uncanny valley of her defense relied on a twisted vision where the victim was better off under her absolute authority. Investigators stated that the suspect had allegedly spent over $1 million of the victim's money on luxury items for herself. This predatory behavior was masked by a series of fraudulent companies that the suspect had established using the victim's legal identity. The systemic silence of the legal system was highlighted when records showed how easily the suspect gained power of attorney. While the perpetrator lived in luxury, the signature mark of her crime, a body beneath concrete, remained hidden from the unsuspecting public. She allegedly viewed the industrial concrete slab not as a grave, but as an artistic seal on a successfully completed ritual. The perpetrator's arrogance was her downfall as she continued to engage with the very people who were investigating her online activities. She reportedly attempted to manipulate her own son into defending her actions on the internet forum to deflect growing public suspicion. This act of throwing her own child under the bus was described by observers as a new low in her deception. The art of her crime began to unravel when the tactical informant recorded her asking for help to find a patsy. She allegedly sought an individual who would confess to the murder in exchange for $50,000 of the victim's money. The perpetrator reportedly felt untouchable until the moment the undercover officer led the search team to the exact spot of burial. Her twisted vision of immortality was finally confronted by the cold, hard reality of the forensic evidence pulled from the earth. The signature mark of the man, his humble clothing, was a silent witness to the final moments he spent with his alleged killer. During the proceedings, the suspect allegedly cried tears that many believed were for her own loss of freedom, not for Abraham. The perpetrator's lack of empathy was a chilling reminder of how easily a kind heart can be consumed by predatory greed. Even as she was led away in chains, she maintained a performance of innocence that defied the overwhelming physical evidence presented. The systemic failure of those meant to protect the victim allowed a predator to turn a miracle into a horrific tragedy. Abraham's life was a testament to the danger of a sudden windfall when surrounded by those who view people as currency. Each detail of the investigation served as a bridge to a final understanding of how the lottery curse truly functions. The narrative of the man who won $30 million would forever be linked to the woman who stole his breath. The artificial display of her success was built on a foundation of betrayal that no amount of money could ever justify. Behind the prison walls, the perpetrator remains a haunting figure of the uncanny valley. In the world of true crime, the silence of the Florida backyard is now a somber memorial to a man whose only crime was being too generous. The investigation reached its logical conclusion, but the emotional scars on the community and the family would remain forever raw. The perpetrator's artistic vision of a life without consequences was shattered by the persistent pursuit of truth by dedicated strangers. As the final gavel fell, the story of Abraham Shakespeare became a permanent cautionary tale in the annals of criminal history. The final chapter of Abraham Shakespeare's life serves as a somber reminder of how quickly a miracle can transform into a tragedy. His generous spirit was systematically exploited by a predator who viewed his $30 million windfall as her own personal artistic canvas. Doris Moore allegedly maintained her twisted vision of financial preservation, even as she stood before a judge to face her final sentence. The signature mark of her lack of remorse was a series of crocodile tears shed for her own lost freedom and reputation. She was sentenced to life in prison plus 25 years for the first-degree murder of a man who only wanted to help. Even from behind bars, she reportedly continues to manipulate the narrative, claiming that she was a victim of the lottery winner target. The systemic silence that allowed her to operate for months was finally shattered by the unyielding dedication of internet-based criminal investigators. These ordinary individuals used their wits to uncover the financial rot and property records that the authorities had initially failed to secure. The uncanny valley of her digital deception, the fake texts and staged videos, was eventually exposed as a crude mask for cold-blooded murder. Abraham's physical remains were recovered from an impossible setting, buried deep beneath an industrial concrete slab in a quiet Florida backyard. He was found wearing the same clothes from his final video, a haunting preservation of the moment his life was allegedly stolen. The perpetrator's arrogance led her to hand the murder weapon directly to an undercover officer, thinking she could purchase a fake confession. This act of staggering delusion confirmed the judge's assessment that she was the most manipulative person the court had ever encountered. While the suspect remains in the Lowell Correctional Institution, the legacy of her victim continues to resonate with those he touched. Friends and strangers alike remember a man who would give his last few dollars to anyone in need without a second thought. His signature mark was not the money he won, but the strong yet gentle handshake and the sincerity in his tired eyes. The $30 million jackpot became a curse that attracted wolves, leaving a family to mourn a soul lost to extreme greed. The concrete has been cleared, but the weight of the betrayal still hangs heavy over the community that failed to see the predator. Each line of this investigative narrative serves to honor a simple laborer who deserved a peace he was never allowed to find. The transition from a lucky winner to a cautionary tale is a tragedy that will haunt the history of the Florida lottery. Justice was eventually served through the harmony of amateur sleuths and law enforcement, working together to pull the truth into the light. The digital trail left by a killer was her undoing, proving that no amount of industrial cement can truly bury a conscience. Abraham Shakespeare is no longer just a headline or a comically large check, but a symbol of a heart that was too kind. The predatory shadow of Doris Moore will remain confined, while the memory of a generous man is finally allowed to rest. The silence of the island has been replaced by the roar of the truth, echoing across the digital forums that saved a case. We close this investigation with the image of a man on a beach, a hope that was once a lie but now a prayer. The artificial preservation of a crime is over, and the reality of a life lived with sincerity is all that remains. May the story of the man beneath the concrete remind us that the greatest wealth is found in the souls we choose to trust.